Hello, this is a message to say that a brand new Super Week is now in motion, which means from Sunday the 19th of January until Saturday the 25th of January, there will be a brand new episode released every single day. For early releases, ad-free listening, and lots of other exclusive episodes, please consider becoming a super listener for approximately 75p a week. Details are in the description.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/kidsandfamily. Just go to Indeed.com/kidsandfamily right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
To the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. It's time for the last episode on this very special Super Week. Welcome to Day 7 and welcome to Episode 7. We started the week with a proper United legend in Sir Matt Busby with a double episode. We then explored the life and journey of Rasmus Højlund, Ella Toon, Paul Scholes, Lisandro Martinez, and we finished the week off with another legend of the club. A man known as Robbo, but with his real name being Bryan Robson. Now, you may well not have heard of Bryan Robson, but I know how much of an appreciation the Football for Kids listeners have for footballers from all times in history. And Bryan was a genuine great for so many reasons. Before we get into the episode on him, let's do a couple of your shout-outs and your messages, shall we? The first one says, "Hi Darren, my name's Max and I'm 7 years old. I listen to your podcast every single night before I go to sleep. I support Chelsea FC and Cole Palmer is my favourite player. I play for Potters Bar Crusaders Crawlers Under 8s. That's quite a team, isn't it? What a name. Please could you say hello to my teammates Oscar, Hayden, Archie, Ben, Sarge and Zach, and of course our coaches Matt and Alex. Thank you so much. I'd love a Cole Palmer and Nicholas Jackson podcast. From Max." Well, Max, a massive shout out to you, to everybody in your team, your teammates, and of course to your football coaches who give up their time and do such a wonderful job, I am sure. There's already an episode on Cole Palmer. If you have a search through the 260 plus episodes, you will find it in there somewhere. Nicholas Jackson, however, is on my very long list of episodes which I need to write. The next one has come from a Football for Kids mum. "Hi Darren, fabulous job with the podcast. My boy absolutely loves it. He must have listened to every episode at least 10 times and he'd love a shout out. Well, you're in luck, Oliver Harrison, because your super mum Laura Harrison has got in touch and told me that you are a little legend. So, a massive shout out to Oliver Harrison, who's 7 years old. He lives in Norwich and he supports Norwich City FC and Liverpool. His favourite player is Messi and he plays for Blowfield United under 7s. So a huge shout out to you, Oliver, and to everybody in your football team, your coaches, and of course to your mum. Right then, that's all we got time for in terms of shout outs and messages on this episode. If you want a shout out or a message, then ask an adult to get in contact via the website www.footballforkidspodcast.com. Now, before we dive into his story, I'm talking about Bryan Robson of course, let's take a moment to look back and realise what a legend Robson was. To truly appreciate his journey, you must first understand the magic of his legacy. Bryan Robson wasn't just a footballer, he was a beacon of greatness. A name spoken by so many with such huge smiles on their faces. Not just in the UK, not just in Europe, but across the whole world. He was a superstar whose influence rippled through generations. David Beckham called him his hero, Gary Lineker admitted that he looked up to him, and Sir Alex Ferguson, a man whose accolades need no introduction, declared Robson to be Manchester United's finest player for years. And Gary Neville, well, he said Bryan Robson epitomised everything he thought a United player should be. And when those names are talking about somebody like that, you know that they were one of the best. So let's dive into it, shall we? Into the extraordinary tale of one of Manchester United's greatest ever. The man, the legend, Robbo. Bryan Robson was born on January 11th in 1957 in Durham, England. Bryan Robson's journey begins in a football stadium, as one of his earliest and most magical memories came when he was a wide-eyed boy of 6 or 7 years old. It was at Newcastle's hallowed stadium that young Bryan first felt the pull of the beautiful game. Hand in hand with his father, he'd step into the vastness of the arena. Its towering stands seemed otherworldly to a child of his age. Before the match began, his dad would lead him down to the fence, hand him a steaming cup of Bovril and leave him to soak in the electric atmosphere as people packed into the stadiums and started to sing. For an hour, Bryan sat transfixed, staring at the green pitch, marvelling at the players who graced it and soaking in all of the energy the stadium had to offer. When his dad returned, they would watch the game together. But by then, the magic had already woven itself into Bryan's heart. Those moments, those stadium sights and sounds became a cherished treasure for Bryan. Memories that have stayed with him forever. Those little moments inspired that young boy to become a legend of the game. Bryan played football like almost all kids did. With his mates at the park and at the school, he was a determined young player with bags of ability and talent. One day, Bryan was at home with his mum and his dad when there was a knock at the door. 12-year-old Bryan opened the door to be greeted by a man who introduced himself as a football scout for Burnley Football Club. The man came in and spoke with Bryan's parents, and Bryan was asked to come and do a week's trial with the club. Although he went to the trial with the club, he actually ended up playing and moving away from home to join West Bromwich Albion. When Bryan left the North East to go and play for West Brom in the Midlands, he was leaving his friends and family at the age of 15 years old. This was a big move, and a very brave move, for someone of that age, especially back at this time. Because what you've got to remember is there was no smartphones, no video calls or anything like that. To communicate with his family, it would be writing letters and the odd landline telephone conversation. Now, you're probably wondering what a landline is. You're going to have to ask your adults. I haven't got time to explain it. Like we've heard on many an occasion on the podcast with many players, Bryan Robson struggled with his build and his size. He was quick, a good thinker, had a very good footballing brain amongst other attributes, but he wasn't the biggest of players. After being with the club for some time, West Bromwich Albion decided they would feed him lots of steak, and this was all in the hope of building him up and making him a bigger, stronger player. When Bryan was eventually offered a contract with the club as a professional, he was told he'd be earning £75 a week, which in today's money is approximately £750 a week. Bryan, with a huge smile on his face, left the office, opened himself a bank account and called his parents to tell them. He also told them he wouldn't need to be borrowing any money from them. What a lovely phone call for him to make. Early on into his professional career with West Brom, Bryan suffered some serious injuries. He broke his leg 3 times in a period of 9 months. But Bryan was never going to allow this to hold him back from being the player he knew he could become. He did all the right things, he kept the right positive attitude, and he came back each and every time because, quite simply, he was a trooper. Bryan, week in, week out, in training and at every opportunity, was showing everybody around him the sort of player he was. But it was in 1978 that things really started to go really well for him. when a legendary former Oxford United player and now a top football manager called Ron Atkinson took over West Brom. When Atkinson became the manager, Bryan Robson became a regular face in the starting 11, and he started to thrive, because sometimes some players just work brilliantly for some managers and in the systems which they work. At the end of that season, West Brom went to China for a 5-match football tour, and it was a very interesting and very different trip indeed. Bryan and his West Brom teammates would play in front of 80,000 fans in stadiums, where, get this, the fans weren't allowed to chant, make noise, do any songs or anything alike. In fact, if they were making any noise, then the speakers would go, and in the stadium, the fans would be told to be quiet. It was very, very different to how football was in England. In the following season, under the watchful eye of Atkinson, West Bromwich Albion were an unbelievably good side, and Robson, in many people's opinions, was the best of the bunch. There's also a good story from that time of when West Brom were playing Manchester United away at Old Trafford. Bryan Robson had scored, as had other players, and the score was 3-2, with seconds to go before the first half whistle would be blown. Atkinson, the West Brom manager, disappeared down the tunnel before the whistle had been blown and was waiting for his losing team to appear. They all walked into the changing room, and the manager then told them that they could equalise if they just did a bit more, and they kept playing with the same enthusiasm and the same heart that they had been. Little did he know that one of the players had already equalised after he'd walked down the tunnel. They all thought it was hilarious, and eventually they told him. West Brom went on to win the game, and Robson looked brilliant in the process. Over the coming months, Robson was being spoken about more and more as the best player not only in the West Brom squad, but the best player in the league. Eventually, lots of the big teams really wanted to get their hands on him. Manchester United wanted to buy Bryan Robson, but the then manager of West Brom told him the only way you're going to Manchester United, Bryan, is if I go there. Well, can you guess what happened next? Well, if you guessed that Ron Atkinson, the West Brom manager, became the Manchester United manager, then you got yourself 3 points. Bryan Robson became a Manchester United player for just over £1.5 million. It was a British record for a player who everyone was speaking about and was being referred to as gold. In October 1981, at a home game against Wolves, Bryan Robson walked out onto the pitch in a rather questionable suit. He had some tight perms in his hair, and he signed his contract on the pitch in front of 47,000 cheering fans. It all became very real from that moment, and whether he was going to be worth the money, well, the proof would have to be in the pudding. After a year of playing for United, Robson became the Manchester United captain. He had all the qualities needed and some. He was unbelievably determined. He worked his socks off in every moment of every single game. He scored goals, he made assists, he was the ultimate professional. He was a leader, and he was the United number 7, proper captain material. One of the many things which people admired about Robson was his consistency. He didn't really go through those moments which you see so often, where he was good for a few months and then he wasn't so good for a few months. He was solid. He never gave up. He never left anything on the pitch, and the results because of that were staggering. There are so many very special moments in games when it comes to Bryan Robson, but there was one game in particular where he was extra special. You wouldn't believe it. It was 1984, and in the second leg of the European Cup Winners' Cup quarter-final at Old Trafford. United had lost 2-0 to Barcelona and were going into one of the toughest second legs they had ever experienced. This wasn't just Bryan Robson and Manchester United versus Barcelona, this was Bryan Robson versus Diego Maradona's Barcelona. Robson was sensational. He was on fire. His feet, his power, his agility, his desire to win was unmatched. Nobody on that football pitch had the desire which he did that night. Those that were there have said that they had never, ever known Old Trafford to be rocking like it was that evening. The atmosphere was utterly electric. Robson scored 2 goals and United went on to win the game 3-0. The fans were so excited that they stormed the pitch at the end of the game and was lifting Robson above their heads like they'd won a trophy already. Robson had saved the day in many fans' eyes. What a moment. What a player. Bryan Robson went on to win 3 FA Cups with United, 1 European Cup Winners' Cup, 2 Premier League titles and 2 Charity Shields as well. 13 seasons he spent there, hundreds of goals, and without doubt he is a name who will forever be in the United history books as one of their best to ever do it. I think the lesson to take from Bryan Robson is that he was able to achieve so much. Yes, because he worked really hard. Yes, because he was always focused. Yes, because he wore the shirt with pride, because he never gave up. But he did all of this and so much more while being a good person, while having a smile on his face, while showing immense respect to everyone around him, whether they were on his team or not. He did it all whilst being a decent human. Everyone could learn something from that. So, next time you hear a parent or grandparent or someone older says the name Bryan Robson, expecting you to know nothing about him, you know plenty. You know about his journey, you know about some of his achievements, and you know that he is a Manchester United great. So remember, if you know someone who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids. And whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly or pitchside, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.